It was an exercise in watching beautiful.
It was a 12-round masterclass. All we hear in his words, we need to see the proof end on.
What is second, first loser, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So I love that mentality. Welcome to Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. This is episode 51. What's the date today, Spence?
What is the date today?
12th December, isn't it?
Yeah, 12th December, yeah.
Episode 51. I'm not going to say like and subscribe because we don't need to, like we discussed last week. But anyway, let's get on with this week's show. Bournemouth.
Yes.
Chris Billam-Smith.
Yeah.
You were there? I was there?
Yeah. Yeah, listen, firstly, we got to talk about the atmosphere. The atmosphere was absolutely insane. You can understand why they go back there. I mean, you know, the fight with Lawrence Okoli at the Vitality Stadium back in May, atmosphere was wicked, brilliant. We even go as far as Isaac Chamberlain in the same arena, the Big Arena. I think that was in the November of the year before. I mean, you just can't beat that atmosphere. Yeah, and I think that was what was needed. The reason I mentioned that was because that was what was needed for Chris Billam-Smith to win that fight. Because after 4 or 5 rounds, Simon, I looked at him and he was walking back to the corner and I'm looking at him, watching his body language, and I could see that actually he ain't got a lot left. He is digging really deep. He is going to a place here. He's trying to find something. And that's what he does. And he eventually done it. I think he turned the screw in at the 6th round and the 7th round he got the victory. But yeah, what an atmosphere.
Well, yeah,
what
I you know, again, I walked into that. I was slightly concerned, without wanting to be melodramatic, that given there was a large Polish contingent there, that if this result had gone with the Polish fighter, with Masternak, that we could have seen a little bit of aggravation on our hands. Because like a lot of boxing arenas, there is always an edge to it at times.
Yeah.
A few drinks can take people in the wrong direction. And the Polish fans, as you could see, I think they were sitting up near the top behind you in the commentary position.
Yeah.
And they were very vociferous.
They were. And there was a lot of them as well.
Yeah.
He brought a big Polish contingent over,
They did. And the atmosphere, you know, was great. It was an electric atmosphere. But that's what you get when you get into you know, an environment where you've got a very partisan crowd that don't see that much boxing, but also are very committed to their fighter. And you get small environments where you've got 3,500 fans that are absolutely rabid. Interesting also on a Sunday evening, you know, because at this moment in time for Bournemouth, their team's doing well in football. They just smashed Man United 3-0, and their local fighter is a world champion.
They were playing away on the Saturday, weren't they? Hence why the
Man United won 3-0, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thought the atmosphere was great. The only problem I had is I didn't feel very well. I needed to find a toilet pretty quickly.
No way.
Absolutely.
But I saw you, because we were sitting obviously in the commentary position. I saw you sitting over there, but
I thought it was an allergic reaction to Gareth Davis.
Well, I did as well. That's what I was going to say.
So.
I recognise you didn't come over and say hello. You just give a little wave, and I thought,
no, I just didn't feel very well. Try and find a toilet in an auditorium full of boxing fans.
Oh my God! So yeah, I mean, look, let's break the performance down. You know,
that was more to the point. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't surprised by what I saw, given the billing that you'd given Masternak.
Yeah.
Given the performances that he's had in the past and the difficulty that Tony Bellew had with him, and given the fact that this was a fight which was his first world title shot and probably his last, right? He was going to go in there and put a performance of sorts on. And given the way Chris Billam-Smith fights, I always felt that this was going to be a fight that he took over in the second half of the fight.
Sure.
I didn't expect him to... He got made to look pedestrian at times. He took a lot of shots, and those shots were beginning to wear on him.
Yeah.
And I think he had to really bite down on the gum shield. And I think when they sent him out in the 6th, you saw a sort of almost of the gloves. Okay, let's get ourselves together here now.
A second wind. That's what you saw. I think he got a bollocking in the corner.
Yeah.
When he went back in, I think it was the end of the 5th or the end of the 6th. He got a bollocking in the corner, and that was what was needed, a strong corner at that point. Because like I say, from that opening bell, we always knew it was going to be a hard fight because stylistically with Masternak, who comes forward and, as you pointed out, you know, pushed Bellew to the wire, and he hadn't been beaten since 2018. That was a unanimous points decision to Dorticus, who was another great fighter. And you looked at it, you always knew it was going to be difficult. Chris went out there, and it wasn't working for him because he was waiting too long, and Masternak was leading off with the shots. He was getting through with some good right hands, and Chris was soaking too much up.
And taking punishment.
And you're thinking, if he starts taking this punishment, if this punishment continues into the second half of the contest, he's going to buckle at some point. One of them's going to go, his legs are going to go, and he's not going to have the recovery powers that he should be having because he's taken so much. like I said, I looked at the end of the fourth and I thought, Chris has really got to find something. I'm starting to worry a little bit. Then the fifth round went.
I didn't. I thought he was taking a lot. But I didn't worry. I thought he's going to start getting into this fight, because I felt that he started slowly. Whether that's because there was nerves or apprehension or the scale of expectation because he's fighting in front of his own fans. But I thought it took him a while to get into the fight, and I think he gave Masternak probably a little bit more respect than necessarily he could have done. He didn't impose him on. I thought he's got to give this guy something to think about, because right now he isn't giving him a lot to think about.
He took the fight to Masternak, and I think what happened was Masternak slipped into a rhythm before Chris did. Like, he started getting off with his jab, found the range with a jab, and then the right hand, big damage with the right hands. So Chris started getting a little bit more desperate, started forcing it a bit more, but he wasn't getting off with his shots. And Masternak was doing the right thing, popping the combinations, tying him up, and it was starting to get rough in there. And that's the way that they both like to fight. And we've seen with Chris before, we saw it as the fight I just mentioned against Lawrence Okoli, where he had to grind it out. And that's exactly what he had to do there. I didn't think the finish was going to be the way that it was, though. You know, he got a good left hook to the body, popped. I think I saw Masternak in our hotel the following morning. He broke 3 ribs.
Well, that's what I heard, because my first reaction was, what's gone on here? Something's gone on here.
Yeah, a lot of people,
like most people, would have gone, has he just quit on his stall? Yeah. Because no one could see why he would have quit on his stall. But when you've got a broken rib, and Shane McGuigan made the point afterwards, you know, in terms of, we saw there was a bulge on his rib and told him to work that. Yeah. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's been an opportunity?
No, it was just opportunity, spur of the moment. You see the shot, you throw the shot, it lands, and then Masternak's there. I go, this is where Chris is at right now, right? Because Chris said, I felt good, and he did come out banging his gloves and whatnot. But I know in Chris's mind, as he's sitting there, so you saw that and you think, right, he's had a good round there. Was it round 7? He's had a good round there. He's like, you know, he's starting to break.
We started to get himself together about the 6th, didn't he?
When the referee goes like that and Masternak's sitting in his corner, then Masternak gets up really slowly and he starts doing this. I know that Chris is looking over there thinking, and they're going, we're going, what's going on here? Is he not going to come out? And I know in Chris's mind he's thinking, please don't come out. Please don't come out. Because it was literally a life or death struggle that he was going through there. But that's what champions do. They can turn the screw, they can turn it around. And Chris Billam-Smith, we saw it against Jose as well. We saw it against Isaac Chamberlain at times as well, where Chris goes to a dark place that he has to, you know, reach deep within himself. And that's what he does, and that's what champions do.
Did you think
and he's done that.
Did you think I didn't, I mean, all due respect to the fact he won, and I'm pleased he won. Did you think it was? I didn't think it was a world-class performance. Did you?
No, totally not. And I think that, you know, moving forward, I know that Richard Riakporhe is going to be made mandatory contender now. I think that was inevitable anyway. I think that is the next fight for Chris Billam-Smith. So they go over old ground back from 2019. Great fight. I think Riakporhe won on a split decision, didn't he, in the first one in 2019?
He did, yeah.
Well, on that performance, Riakporhe he's grown into a very good fighter, and I think on that performance he would have serious problems, Chris Billam-Smith. It was a below par.
I spoke to Richard in a different format about, because whatever way cut it, Chris has gone on to fight world level fighters. Yeah. He's fought Lawrence Okoli. Yeah. And he's fought Masternak. Yeah. Now Okoli was tipped to win that fight. Yeah. And the performance was poor, but notwithstanding it, some of it was made to be poor by Chris Billam-Smith. I know that Richard has fought Glowacki and made an impressive statement there. But who of the two fighters, given the direction of travel they've gone in with since Richard beat him on a split decision, who has improved the more? Because you're right. He's the #1 contender, which is just about to be made mandatory, and I think Ben's making that position with the WBO now. That's right. They're talking about this fight happening in May at the Vitality. Yeah. Albeit Richard was talking about something at Sellers Park. I'm not quite sure what he was talking about there.
No, I think we go with Vitality, and then for people that are wondering what's happened to Lawrence Okoli, because he was meant to be having his immediate rematch, I think Lawrence then is going to fight the winner of Chris Billam-Smith versus Richard Riakporhe. That's where it sits at the moment.
Why?
Because what I believe was that Chris Billam-Smith was given an extension on this one to have the Masternak fight, as long as so basically they withheld making the mandatory for Richard Riakporhe. So he was given an extension so that he could have a voluntary against Masternak, and then Riakporhe's in line. And I think with Lawrence Okoli, he's happy to wait for the winner of that because he's just getting back into things and that
given,
himself.
Given
I
Lawrence,
think it was an agreement through all the parties. That's basically where they're at.
Yeah, given that Lawrence's recent performances have been absolutely turgid, I think most people will not be missing out on seeing Lawrence Okoli at this moment in time because it's been poor.
But 2019, Richard Riakporhe versus Chris Billam-Smith was an absolute blinder. Was there and that was one of those where Chris had to really dig deep, and Richard had to ask himself a few questions as well. Who's improved the most since then? I think Richard's definitely the improved fighter of the two, but Chris Billam-Smith has that experience at that level.
How do you
I just think he's grown as a fighter. So what I've seen with Richard Riakporhe, which has been the missing link in what he does, is that he seems to have lost that fear factor. So Richard's always, for me, seems to have had everything in the locker, but he's never had the confidence in his own ability. That's probably a better way of putting it. And what I see now is that Richard now believes in himself, whereas before I don't think he did really believe in himself. What I'm saying there is, so when the fight comes to him, or he's got to sit in the pocket and he's got to get tough, you see this look on Richard's face where he doesn't really want to be there. He don't really believe in himself. That's important with a fighter. Whereas Chris Billam-Smith is that guy. He does believe in himself. He doesn't he doesn't mind getting in there, getting in the mix, and toughing it out, as like we saw on Saturday.
Different animals. I mean, I sat next to one of Richard Riakporhe's mentors up in Manchester when he knocked out Glowacki, and he talked about the belief system that's now in Richard.
There you go.
It's a belief. He now believes that he goes in there to do a job.
And that's what was missing before. And with that's why I say now, that's why I favour him now over, because I think with Chris Billam-Smith, what you see is what you get, and he's always had that. And all he's got now on his side is that he's got that improvement. All he's got now is that experience, and that he's been there before, so he knows how to go in that and he knows how to turn it around, and he knows how to.
It must be frustrating. It must be frustrating for Riakporhe, because I remember I saw Richard prowling around the ring in Bournemouth on Sunday evening, but more recently and more pertinently, the fight that was going to happen was everyone expected Okoli to beat Chris Billam-Smith. Yeah. There was this rancor and irritation between Okoli and Richard that had started at the Creed premiere, hadn't it? And they'd gotten a bit involved in a little bit of argy-bargy. And Richard was obviously waiting to call out Lawrence. Yeah. Didn't get the opportunity. So it must be a little bit frustrating for Richard, because he's 33, he's 34 soon. Yeah. Time is moving on. And whilst he's not an old man, he's not a young fighter anymore. And this 23 has been a little bit of standing still, whilst Chris Billam-Smith is now the world title holder. Yeah, got that win.
I mean, I've asked him about that. He said, "Listen, look, I understand the business of it, and I've got to make the right move at the right time, because that it's all about opportunity." He was offered the Jai Opetaia fight. I was
going to say, isn't he a contributor to some of that frustration?
Absolutely,
himself?
He offered the Jai fight. He said it wasn't the fact that I didn't want to go in there, and I don't believe that I could beat him. It's the money. He said it's a business ultimately. It's a business, and I'm waiting and I'm looking and I'm seeing what's going on. He said I thought I was going to get the Lawrence Okoli fight, but fair play to Chris. He won that fight, so now Chris has got something that I want. Even though I've beaten him, he's now got something that I want. And from a business point of view, he said this is where it's a fight that is even more winnable than maybe the others, like as in an easier option.
Some would say,
and financially much more rewarding than what he would have got against Opetaia.
Well, some would say that once you're a world champion, you can then start to write your own checks and give yourself an opportunity. If he'd have taken the Jai Opetaia fight, won it, he would now be a defending champion. It would be a unification fight with Chris Billam-Smith, and he'd be sat at the table with a different split of the purse.
So some would say take opportunity over purse, and then the purse will come over the opportunity.
That's my point.
Totally understand that. But I think Richard's a smart kid. You know Richard anyway.
I do.
You know him personally. You understand what he is, and he recognises that he's world ranked in all the governing bodies. He's looking for the right opportunity. Jai Opetaia, many consider as the monster of the division. You go, if I'm fighting him, and this is because I know I'm going to get an opportunity elsewhere because I'm so well ranked. If I'm going to fight Opetaia, I want good money to do that, and then obviously you're winning that. Risk reward.
Here's an interesting divergence from that argument. The rumour going round is that Opetaia is vacating the IBF belt.
Yes.
So that creates an interesting landscape, because I said to Richard the other day, I'd prefer you to be at the table with a belt.
Yeah.
Not more I'd love to see than a unification fight between two British fighters.
Well, I think what you've got is that, if Jai Opetaia, because I think he's signed
a vacant belt.
He's signed a 2-fight deal, hasn't he, with the IBF. I think he beat Marius Bradus in a fight. Marius Bradus was meant to have the immediate rematch, but he got injured, so he was going to be
Thompson.
Yeah, so he fought Thompson, but they said you can't have any more voluntaries now. You have to box Bradus next, which is for March time. And now Elias Zorro's coming. They said You can't have that. Zorro's not even in the top 15.
Yeah.
So you can't, so we will strip you of the title. That's the reason behind stripping him. So you look at that then, if the IBF title becomes vacant, I think you've got Marius Bredas is at number 1, Dorticus is at number 2, Richard's down at about number 5, Lawrence Coley, I think, is at number, or no, it might be Richard 4, Lawrence 5, something. They're there anyway.
So there's no way that Boxer could engineer an IBF shot.
Well, this is where we're at. We've got Marius Bredas 1, Dorticus 2. So if Boxer can make, but we've also got Richard Riakporhe ranked very highly. We've also got, Lawrence Coley ranked highly as well.
I'm just saying from the Riakporhe point of view,
I understand what you say.
He fights for the IBF belt. He then goes in against Chris Billam-Smith at a later point
for unification.
Yeah. Just the thought process.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on from Riakporhe to cruiserweights and that division, which is an interesting division, but there's also another really interesting division. One we got a lot of interest in this country, which is light heavyweight. Yeah. Obviously, we've got a history in that division with John Conti and people of that nature that were world champions at light heavyweight. Yeah. But we've also got now a really strong staple of light heavyweights: Boatsy, Aziz, Anthony Yard, one of my personal favourites. Yeah. But on Sunday, we saw what people perceive to be the next superstar, which is Ben Whittaker.
Yeah.
Brilliant punch to knock the fellow out.
Yeah.
But there's a lot about Ben Whittaker that's causing discussion.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's this perception he's an ex-superstar. He thinks he's an ex-superstar.
I think he is.
Him not turning up to interviews sometimes indicates that he's already arrived in superstar status in his own mind.
Yeah.
But the performance against the lesser opponents was what it was, wasn't it? It was impressive. But there was also a reaction. That's what I was going to get to.
Yeah.
There was a reaction from certain sections of the auditorium, which is to some of the antics, some of the showboating, some of the piss taking that he was doing with an opponent of a lesser level.
Yeah. Was a little bit too much. Listen, there's an arrogance about Ben Whittaker, the way that he carries himself. That you go back to the days of, like, say, Muhammad Ali, when you go right back, but more recently, you look at someone like Nazim Hamed and all that. And I said, there's that arrogance about him. But you know what? Like, when you talk about Ali and you talk about Hamid, when they first kicked off, people hated it. They didn't like it, but they grew to love them because they appreciated how good they were. I think this is where Ben Whittaker drops in. Is what I'm saying is that I think he will develop into a fighter where people right now, like you say, they started booing in the 3rd round. He had to stop pissing about, come out 4th round. He got on with the job, and look at the finish. Was sensational. There's a different snap in his shots. The reflexes are brilliant.
But Ali and Nazim Hamed, with due respect, the first time you really saw Ali was him telling what he's going to do to Sonny Liston. Yeah. And when you see Nazim Hamed, and he's doing it to Steve Robinson, right?
Yeah.
This is
but what I'm saying,
do this to Lyndon Arthur. Yeah. Do this to Anthony Yard. Do this to Callum Smith, right? Yeah. But you're doing it with guys that are several levels beneath you.
Don't think, by the way, that I'm putting Ben Whittaker in with Ali and Nazim Hamed or whatever. But what I'm saying is that he's got that arrogance about him, that swagger about him, that he carries himself like that, and that is what it is. He's like a Marmite type. You love or hate him. But people will end up...
He's a beautiful boxer.
Yeah, people end up appreciating... Like, if you look at them reflexes, like, even against a lesser opponent, but you saw the way that he was slipping, pulling away, rolling... Yeah. And when he did get on with the job, when he went back to corner, Sugar Hill said to him, right, come on, the crowd are not appreciating this. Stop pissing about. Get out there and do it. He went out there. Bomb. Finish was sensational.
It was,
What I'm saying is there's a brilliance about this kid.
Yeah.
But he's in a division, like you say, with Anthony Yard, Boatsy, Dan Aziz. He says...
Lyndon Arthur. Callum Smith.
All of those. Callum Smith. Yeah, he said...
And then at the top of the tree, Beterbiev.
Yeah.
Bivol. You know.
They're all cracking on a little bit. Like Ben Whittaker's 26 years of age, 5 fights now, stop-start, frustrating time because of injuries. He reckons by the end of 2024, sorry, he reckons that he will be there or thereabouts. And I think he will be because I think he's got that sort of talent.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that if you look at him, I mean, I watched the performance. We all knew going into this fight that this was levels beneath him. Yeah. Still, we'll go in and do the job, and he did the job. And I've never been one. I love showmen. I love characters. You know, irrespective of the arguments with Eddie Hearn, I recognise him as a promoter as being a showman, and I understand the value of it. I loved Ali. I didn't always admire Nazim Hamed. I didn't like what he did to Steve Robinson. Yeah. I thought that was piss-taking, and I thought it was disrespectful. And there's a line between being better than the opponent and having the style to sell it.
Well, that's where Ben fell in that bracket on Sunday.
And given the level of talent this boy has, you know, obviously there's an argument to say that people will consider it to be arrogant. They considered his approach to throwing away the silver medal in the Olympics. He didn't want it. I like that stance. I thought, you know, what is second? First loser, isn't it? Right? Yeah. So I love that mentality.
Yeah.
But you know, I would like to see him finish fights, do it in style, get onto the next level, moving through the gears, right?
Yeah.
And if he does, and if he can do this to people like Anthony Opp, which by the way, you won't be able to, if he can do this to some of the top fighters, then you're going to have a superstar.
Yeah.
Because he's got, I mean, I don't like all the tattoos he's now got, but that's up to him, right? He can, you know, but I think he'll be a star, and he's got the personality to back it up. Just keep him on the right tracks, keep him focused. He's got the right trainers around him. He's probably in the right camp.
But I mean, you know him on a personal level. You speak to him. He's a smart kid because he knows what he's doing. He's created a character for himself, and that's what he's chose. But when you speak to him on a level, he's actually a really nice guy. Really nice guy. He hasn't got that persona. In his that's his.
No, he doesn't carry it out the ring.
Out of the ring. He's just a lovely kid. He'll ask information. He'll ask, he'll want a little bit of advice. He's a pretty grounded guy.
He's good, isn't he?
But he knows what he's doing. He's smart.
He's good,
he said that's why he was clowning around like that. By the way, he said because he got into. That was an old sparring partner that he boxed there on Saturday, and he said, and so I knew what he was all about. I knew how to get in his head. I knew how to frustrate him because I was like, we were having a back and forth, and I was getting into this thing. He said, so that's why I done what I done. That's why I was taking a piss out of what it was. He said it was nothing to do with wanting to show to the crowd.
He did it in the previous fight. He's hopping across the ring like a
I know,
demented
but he said
kangaroo.
he was getting inside the guy. He said he done that because he knew that's the way to break him mentally.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't ask you. Who do you think wins out of Riakporhe, Billam-Smith?
Richard Riakporhe.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Richard Riakporhe.
I do too.
I just think that, he's slightly more rounded, and now he's got that self-belief, and that was the important thing. That was the only thing missing for me for Richard. I've always rated him unbelievable as a fighter.
The only factor of that is that Richard will walk into an absolute partisan crowd.
Yeah.
And he's not walked into environments where there's been quite the. Yeah. He's going to walk into the Vitality Stadium where probably I'll be the only one supporting him besides his family because he's a Crystal Palace fan.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that Richard will win that fight.
I'm totally with that, and I think that the only thing that we don't know about Richard, which we do about Chris Billam-Smith, is that when we get into round 10 and it's hard, really hard, and you've got to go to that place like he did, Chris, on Sunday night. Can Richard go there? And that's the only thing we don't know. And I think that's Chris's. That's Chris's big chance.
But I don't. In my view,
if he can take him there.
My view is I think Richard Riakporhe will knock him out.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If he can take him there, yeah.
No, and I don't want that for. And I don't want that for Chris. But my allegiance will be with Richard because of our relationship and who he supports. Anyway, there was a fight on the weekends that was just besides the fights that we saw live. Devin Haney pretty much boxed Regis Prograis' fucking ears off, didn't he?
Yeah.
It was a schooling, a humbling. It was an exercise in watching beautiful.
It was a 12-round masterclass. That's what it was.
It was a shutout.
Yeah. I mean, Regis Prograis is a top class. We saw the fight 2019 O2 Arena against Josh Taylor, and that went down to the wire. I actually thought Prograis won that fight. There was nothing in it. Split decision. Very close. Could have gone either way. Josh, thankfully, it went his way. But it was one of those when you go, that Prograis moved up in weight, and he's looked great. I mean, he's looked really great. And but he was brilliant, Haney. I mean, there was questions about the Lomachenko fight. Yeah, because that's the thing. Regis Prograis was obviously down at lightweight. He was down at lightweight, and it was no good for him. Or super lightweight, it was no good for him. He looked too, he was too drained. He's too drained. As soon as he jumps up a weight, I mean, that was a sensational performance.
Oh, of course it was.
Sensational. He carried that from 135 up to 140. I mean, putting on that extra weight, people are going to go, does he need to grow into the weight? He's in against Regis Prograis, who's a great fighter himself. Well, there's your answer there. He was just struggling too much down at, that Lomachenko fight. He was lucky to come away with a victory in that fight.
Haney.
But, definitely. You could see that he was weight drained.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. Haney,
weight drained.
The debate about what the fight was with Lomachenko, and there were lots of debates, and we discussed it.
Yeah.
And we felt that he was very lucky to have gotten that result.
Absolutely.
In this fight,
jumping up to super lightweight was the best thing he could have done.
This was like a man against a boy, stylistically in every aspect. Drops him twice.
Yeah.
Right. But just boxes his bloody ears off.
Yeah.
And when you're watching boxing as a layman like me, or a motivated layman, and then a fighter like you watch it and you think, what a boxer.
Well, look, before the fight happened, we go, lean towards Haney, but can't write Regis off. He's the one with the power, everything else. We look at it, as soon as the first bell went, as you said,
perfect way to fight southpaw, right?
As a fight, absolutely. As the fight unfolds, Prograis the southpaw, and you're thinking, right, Haney's struggled in his last fight against the southpaw in Lomachenko. I know it's slightly different, but he's still a southpaw, and he struggled. He looked vulnerable at times. moving up that extra weight division. I mean, like leading off on the right hand, which is the key shot for the southpaw, nailed him in the 3rd round, drops Regis, nails him again in the 6th round, nearly drops him.
But just beats him up every round.
Just a beatdown, yeah.
Just beats him up every round.
So yeah, unbelievable.
But the reasons why I'm talking about Devin Haney and Regis Prograis in this particular part of the conversation is because it leads me into Josh Taylor.
Yes.
And whilst Josh Taylor's having a sulk and doesn't want to talk to people like me because someone dared criticise him once, besides praising him all the time, child, the opportunity seems to be manifesting itself for Josh Taylor to talk about fighting Devin Haney.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether it's a fight Haney would fancy. He's come off the back of a loss to Teofimo Lopez. Josh, I don't think he's in any position to dictate to anybody who he doesn't fight.
Listen, I think Josh.
What do you think of that fight?
I think Josh's future lies at 147. I think he struggles too much at 140 pounds. And I think we saw that, and we've seen it in his last couple of fights.
I thought we would already made that decision, hadn't we?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But
so where's this coming from then?
Yeah, well, I really don't know, if I'm totally honest. I think it's just one of those. Does he feel like he's calling out now?
Because he said it himself, didn't he? Didn't he talk about it himself?
Yeah.
Being that this is a weight issue. So what's this about then?
Yeah.
Money?
Really, yeah, all about money.
Right.
All about money, and that's why this Catchall fight, the rematch, hasn't happened. I think Eddie Hearn, the money that Eddie Hearn has offered Josh Taylor for the Catchall fight, he said, listen, it doesn't make sense. Financially, it doesn't make sense, so I'm going to chase the big fights. I want Devin Haney's, I want them sort of people. That's where I want to be. And it sort of that makes sense.
But given the challenges that we've seen from him at that weight, isn't that a shot to nothing potentially?
I think so, yeah.
It looks to me, I mean, I and you, and I still think it, irrespective of the fact that I think he's got a petted lip now about what's being said about him because of the losses that he's had and the Jack Catchall observations, which, by the way, are fair and on the money, and they're not been unkind, they've just been as they are. I think that ultimately the weight class that he needs to go up to is the one above the one that he's in now because he's struggling at it, and he said it himself.
I totally agree, but you've got people like Terence Crawford are up there. Jerome Ennis has now been elevated to IBF champion. There's some big names up there and some tough fights, but they're world-class operators. But that's where Josh Taylor's sitting right now. He was the undisputed super lightweight champion. His career's done at that weight, by the way. It's done at that weight. We've seen that in his last couple of performances. Teofimo Lopez, he looked terrible, and he did against Catchall as well. And that's down to weight, only down to weight. And I think that he's got that body frame. He needs to move up, and I think that's where
Jack will fight him at a bigger weight, though, won't he?
Yeah, Jack said that they'll do a catch weight, so he'd fight him at like 144 or something like that.
But the reason why this doesn't happen is, in your assertion, is because no one wants to pay the price on the ticket.
The reason that this hasn't happened, this is coming from Taylor's mouth, that he's saying that, Eddie Hearn's offering him 20% of what he should be getting, really. And he said that's where we're at. He said, forget that there's no belts on the line. Yeah. It's a huge fight. And it is a big fight, to be fair. I think, it is a big fight, belts on the line or not. I don't know what he's been offered or what he's getting, but I think for him, he really needs to right the wrongs of that last fight because of the, all the controversy surrounding that. It's old ground that he needs to go over, really, Josh Taylor, because that will affect his legacy, which is a shame because he's one of the best fighters.
But there was a chance to build this fight because the bad blood, the media attention on the injustice that was served up for Jack Catchall.
Do you think he needs to go over old ground with Catchall, by the way? Do you think that's where he should go as opposed to looking at someone like Crawford?
Well, I suppose in the pantheon of the closed circuit, there's a boxing world that says you lost that fight and you should ultimately have to account to it by fighting this guy again. I suppose you should. In the real world where grown-ups live and it's a sport where you get paid for doing what you do, if you can't get the dough on that fight, the opportunity might have been missed. You could have built this fight. This fight could have been built into a kind of Froch Groves moment because Josh Taylor had the same disdain for Jack Catchall that Carl had for George Groves.
Yeah, sure.
The outcome was considered to be an injustice in the same way that it was considered to be an injustice on George Groves. Catchall didn't go in as a villain. He just went in as people kind of ambivalent. So there was this head of steam around it. And Josh's attitude after the fight, and then, of course, his attitude full stop towards Jack is, you're not worthy of being in the ring with me, I beat you full stop. And, of course, now his attitude towards the whole situation is he doesn't like media criticising him for that. I think they've probably missed the boat.
I agree.
I think they've missed the boat, and that's why the economic returns in this fight aren't standing up.
I think Taylor makes a valid point. Now he's saying, listen, forget the controversy surrounding the last fight. The reality is, Jack Catchall needs me. He said because where is he going to go otherwise? You look at the fight against Linares. People think it's a little bit of a ball fest. But what he's saying is,
isn't it?
No, but what he's saying
nobody
is,
needs anybody. I mean, Josh is no longer the A side of the conversation.
He's trying to
I understand
trying to draw more money out of it. But it's an interesting one anyway. But that's where I think that really he should go.
Catterall.
I do, yeah.
If you were Josh, what would you do? I mean, people are talking about Conor Benn, and just for the record, because I listen to a lot of people making an observation that all of a sudden, on the Conor Benn subject, I've become a Conor Benn acolyte and a mouthpiece. I never walked away from the Conor Benn conversation besides saying I met Conor Benn a couple of weeks ago.
Do you know what? The amount of people that have come up to me that obviously watch this show and say to me, "Your mate's changed, didn't he?" Your mate, and I went, "What are you going on about?" Like, yeah, your mate's. Oh, your mate's.
He's wearing a dress.
Like, yeah.
He's going under the name of Siloane. Right.
So I'm glad you're addressing
No, because
it.
I haven't come away from any different view besides the fact that Conor believes that he's got the ability to be able to undermine all the arguments, and that a lot of the information that people have based their opinions upon isn't in the public domain. So I've said to him, "You're going to say it, right?" So he said, "Yeah, I'm going to say it." Yeah. So my part of that conversation was, "I'm not going to repeat what you've told me. You can say it."
Yeah.
So apparently he's going to say it. So then people can make up their own mind. But all I've said about Conor Benn, which is the same thing I've said before, is prove your innocence. And by the way, actually sitting down with him, it reminds me of what a really nice fellow he is.
Yeah.
That's not changing one's mind, all of a sudden becoming on the payroll of the Conor Benn matchroom opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, he's a nice.
I want him to prove his innocence. Prove it.
By the way, when is that going to happen?
Well, there was a rumour they were coming on last week.
And
because they didn't. And I think it's dependent
because it's been the best part of 12 months now that is going to happen, and it's not been happening. So
well, I think it's been more so recently that because I spoke to Conor, there was a feeling that now is the time to talk in the media. He has got some really interesting points. Whether people believe them or not is a different matter. Whether I believe them or not.
Has he got evidence? I think that's what we're talking about.
But that's what he's going to talk about. He believes that he's got the ability to be able to prove that the accusations that are made against him and the reasons behind the substance in his system are provable as being completely explainable.
Yeah, but he can't do that with words. He has to have strong evidence. Strict liability.
Well, no one's heard from Conor. No one's heard from Conor.
That's the point.
But no one's heard from Conor. We've heard from Conor talk about the 270-page report that he brought onto the Piers Morgan show, didn't show anybody, and went to the WBC. Yeah. We're going to talk to him when he comes on air about why it is that they got jurisdiction, because he'll tell you that it wasn't about that. Yeah. Why it was that the medical evidence that was brought to us by this guy that he had, Rene, about metabolites, why that hasn't formed, and he's going to tell you why, and then people are going to make up their own mind about it, aren't they?
Yeah, but has he got scientific proof?
Well, we heard all that, didn't we?
Yeah, but we've not seen it.
I'm not a doctor, so I don't know.
Seen it.
But the point is he's going to be able to. People are going to be able to hear it from him rather than from other people.
Sure.
The arguments that he's made via the doctors that came on the show with me and the empirical evidence they think they've got about the ability to metabolize and produce metabolites based upon what you've ingested rather than what you've injected is something they can prove. So they don't need to prove it to me, and they don't need to prove it to you.
No,
they need to prove it to you, Cad.
All we hear in his words, we need to see the proof.
But they'll also explain to you why they haven't done that, and then people can hear it for themselves. And if people still think that Conor Benn is whatever they think of him in the first place, they'll hear it firsthand, won't they?
Sure.
Right now, we haven't heard that, but it certainly isn't a case of me suddenly deciding that because I've fallen out with Tyson Fury. Who cares, by the way?
You're looking for a new best
I'm looking for a new mate. I've gone through my life without having any mates. God. I don't have to worry about it now. Anyway,
things are going down.
Anyway, do you, as much as it's really important fundamentally that Conor gets himself up from underneath before this conversation really happens.
Yeah.
And it feels almost like I'm falling into a trap of saying this. But do you like the sound of a consequenced or exonerated Conor Benn fighting Josh Taylor?
I would like that fight. Of course, I would love that fight. You know, if all this mess gets cleared up, and he puts himself
for Josh Taylor. Do you think it's the right fight for Josh Taylor if it comes?
Yeah, because it's a money fight. Josh Taylor, I know where Josh Taylor's sat right now. He's been undisputed lightweight champion. He's at this place in his career where he goes, I want to start getting well paid for this. I need I want my pension fund. That's why he's sort of going away from the capture going, there's no money in that. I don't want to go over old ground. I know it's a hard fight. I know really how that last one went. And so if I'm going to do it, I want to get well paid for it. With Conor Benn, he knows he's going to get well paid for it. And I think that's why he'll go, straight away. And that's why we've seen him doing interviews, saying, come on, let me...
Do you think Josh can get big money fights? I mean, he needs to go on a media offensive, not be offensive to the media, Josh. Going on media offensive about presenting yourself in a certain way.
He can only get big money fights with fighting the likes of
because
Conor Benn.
He's had this legacy, Josh, hasn't he? Where before we were all in his camp saying, no one's showing his fights.
Yeah.
You know, he goes and wins world titles and no one pays any attention to it.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, you know, it's criminal really, you know, the career that he's had and how he's had to do it on the road.
Recognition he's
and
got.
the success that he's got. And he's not sort of like being recognised.
And he's so likeable too.
And you ask yourself, you know, you go like 10, 15 years down the road, you know, people will be a hardcore boxing fan that remember him and his legacy and what he'd done. And really, it should be one of those that, you know, you've got to salute what he's achieved.
Absolutely.
It's been absolutely incredible. But for some reason, it hasn't captured the public imagination. And he's in a position right now where he's just chasing the big fights because he can't command that money himself.
We'll see. It should be an interesting 24 anyway, shouldn't
Yeah.
it? Right. That's it for episode 51 of Talk Boxing. We'll look forward to seeing you next week, where we might, subject to outrageous demands, have Calf Watch on.